there are certain skills that can be taught that are really important. And first off is plant energetics.
Hmm.
Plant energetics allows you to understand the energy of the herb. Human energetics allows you to understand the energy and the constitution of the person you are dealing with. And when you can put these two together, it allows you to do something that is exceedingly important, in my opinion, in herbal medicine. And that is you stop treating diseases and you start treating people.
Welcome to the Wild Herbs Podcast, where we unpack and uncover the healing properties of wild herbs so you can heal naturally with the plants beneath your feet. I am your host, April Punsalan, wild, untamed plant lady, also a botanist, an ethnobotanist, and herbalist dedicated to teaching you how to heal with plants. If you want to learn edible and medicinal plants, you are in the right place, my friend. Welcome to the Wild Herb Podcast. I am so grateful and honored to have a true herbal legend on the show today. And so if you are listening, give yourself a pat on the back because you picked the perfect Wild Herb Podcast to listen to with David Winston. Let me tell you a little bit about David. David is an herbalist and an ethnobotanist with nearly 6 decades, 58 years of training across Chinese, Western, and eclectic herbalism and Southeastern herbal traditions. And he has 50 years of clinical practice. So he has put this knowledge into practice, which I think is phenomenal. He's the dean of David Winston's Center for Herbal Studies, a 2-year training program in clinical herbal medicine, which we will talk about at the end. So make sure you stay on the show. And he's the author of several cornerstone texts in the field, including one of the best-selling books, Adaptogens, Herbs for Strength, Stamina, and Stress Relief, and is widely regarded as one of the most respected voices in herbal medicine. And he just has this immense connection with plants. And so I'm very grateful and honored, David, to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, April. It's a pleasure to be here. We were talking before the show started, and I was just saying how it is so delightful to me that people are interested today. When I first started studying herbal medicine in the late 1960s, people say to me, "What are you doing?" I'd say, "I'm an herbalist." And people would look at me like I had just told them I was an alien from another planet. They were like, "What? You mean like spices?" One time somebody said, "You mean like potpourri?" And I said, "No, medicinal plants." And people would just shake their head and kind of like go, "Poor misguided youth. Why would you waste your time studying something that people studied 100 years ago?" Nobody uses plant medicine anymore. And in the late 1960s, we were basically what I will call in the herbal dark ages. With the exception of a small number of ethnic and rural communities, herbal medicine was almost extinct in the United States. And so those of us mostly coming out of the sort of hippie back to the land movement who are interested in organic agriculture and reading books by Yule Gibbons, Stalking the Wild Asparagus and Stalking the Healthful Herbs, which are actually my 2 first books, we were just fascinated and the world thought we were crazy. I remember in my first 2-year herb studies program, I had 2 students, and I was so happy because at the time, again, there was so little interest in this. And so coming to this point, we still have a long way to go, but getting to this point where there is a broad-ranging interest in herbal medicine and what it can help us to do both in staying well and getting well, it's just incredibly gratifying. So for instance, there's now every year, there's what's called Herb Day. And Herb Day was started about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago by Mark Blumenthal and Michael McGuffin from the American Herb Products Association and Mark Blumenthal from the American Botanical Council and the American Herbalist Guild. They thought, shouldn't herbs have a day to be celebrated? And so the New Jersey chapter of the American Herbalist Guild, which is made up of basically I think everybody in it is a former student of mine, started doing a Herb Day celebration. So I think this year's was the 3rd year. And if we had done this 20 years ago, If 100 people had showed up, we would have been thrilled. This year for Herb Day, 2,150
Wow.
plus people showed up for a day celebrating herbs and herbal medicine. And again, that just couldn't have happened 20 years ago, certainly over 40 years ago. So the fact that herbs have become a presence back into the world and people are appreciating these plants and what they can do for us and even what we can do for them, I just think is a marvelous thing.
Yeah, it's great that you've been able to see this change and this shift happen and to witness that. It gives you more hope. You're like, okay, I see positive growth and this return to nature for healing. And I think too, it's because a lot of people are seeing Western medicine as a dead end sometimes. Like we don't get, you hear this so often, like, I had this condition and they didn't know what to do. And I turned to plants. And a lot of our herbalists have that story. I believe Rosalie has that. And I think even Cammie McBride. And there's so many herbalists that came on this path, some of our best herbalists in the nation that had a dead end situation and were healed with herbs. And then they became a teacher, which I think says a lot about the healing of plants and our body to receive that healing. So there's so many questions I would love to ask you, and you have this wide breadth of knowledge. And I was really blessed to hear your podcast with Rosemary Gladstar. And I love your story of how you started your plant path. And so I would love for listeners to be able to hear this story too. And as you're telling it, do you ever think that the plants chose you kind of in a way? Like this was a path that was bestowed upon you? And when did you first step in fully into this world of herbalism?
If I was younger, I would have been diagnosed with all sorts of conditions that didn't exist when I was a kid. ADHD wasn't a thing. Dyslexia wasn't a thing. They just thought you had learning issues. So yes, I am dyslexic and I have what would be called ADHD. I am certainly, I guess, what some people call neurodivergent. And so my childhood in itself was a little bit different. As a child, I was pretty small, and up until a certain point, I was really small and skinny, and then I became small and heavy. And I was the sort of kid that other kids looked at and saw a sign on my back saying, beat me up, kick me, take my lunch money kind of deal. And so I didn't relate all that well to people.
Mhm.
I related really well to plants and rocks and the natural world. And I was fortunate that I always lived someplace where there were woods, either right next to my house or close by my house. And I spent a lot of my time as a child in the woods, hanging out with I had my favorite tree. I had this amazing tree that I spent lots of time in. It was shaped like a ladder. You could just climb it like a ladder. And I can remember my first experience with plants was I must have been, and my mother's gone, so I can't ask her. I don't know if she would have remembered, but somewhere around 4 or 5 years old. And I'm out in the backyard and I have one of those plastic bins. And in it, there's this plant growing in our yard, and I'm picking just the leaves of this plant and I'm putting them in the bin with adding a little water, and I have a rock and I'm mashing them up. And I'm sure I was covered with this stuff. And my mother comes out of the house and she looks at me. And again, I'm probably covered with plant juice. And she works and she goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm making medicine for when you get a boo-boo."
Oh,
And at the time, I didn't know the name of that plant. I do know the name of the plant now. It was plantain.
that's wild.
How did I know this? It wasn't something that was in my family per se. Yes, it was, but not a direct connection. An aunt and an uncle, but I didn't get to know them till later. The plant told me. And to me as a child, and I think this is true of a lot of children, they are aware that plants speak and rocks speak and maybe animals, for them, some people, animals speak. And that's not unusual. But eventually, living in the culture that most of us live in, you get to the point where you realize that Santa Claus isn't real and the tooth fairy is your parents. And people think, oh, yeah, plants speaking to you is just another myth or fable,
Mhm.
story, or something you imagined. Except that in this case, unlike Santa Claus and the tooth fairy, and I'll reserve judgment as to whether they are real or not, but unlike those, perhaps, plants can communicate with us. They communicate with each other. They communicate with
Mm.
insects and animals. There's a wonderful book I would just recommend to your listeners. If you want to understand more about plants and just the genius of plants, there's a book called Green Intelligence that
Mhm.
astonishing as to what they prove plants are capable of doing. So I always had this affinity for plants. So do they choose me? I think they saw someone who didn't fit in, and they took pity on me, and they said, "We'll help this kid out. He needs some help. He needs friends." And plants have been my friends for my entire life. And basically, I fell in love with plants. And you said, when did it become sort of realized? And that would
Mhm.
be when I was around 13 years old.
Mhm.
At that point, I was already, again, I had hair down to halfway down to my waist. I was definitely part of that counterculture movement, even though I was still pretty young at that point. I had read Carlos Castaneda's books and I had tried doing all sorts of plant hallucinogens. Not that I was trying to get high, I was not. I was trying to alter consciousness like he talked about, grow my spirit. Eventually, I realized that what I was doing was a bit of a dead end in the sense that I didn't know the proper ceremonies, the proper
Mhm.
salts to work with the plants. I mean, I had good intentions, but when you work with those kind of medicines, good intentions are not enough. You need to know a whole bunch more than I knew at the time. And I fell in love with this, not only the idea that I could walk out in my backyard and I could find foods that were medicine, plants that were medicines, plants that were foods, but the idea that there was this vast universe surrounding me and something like 98% of the biomass on this planet is plants. We actually make up a very small part of that. We are surrounded by these beings who are incredibly creative. They have, even though they are stationary, they have figured out all sorts of ways and mechanisms to not only survive, but to thrive and create oxygen. If plants went away, we probably couldn't survive more than a couple weeks.
That's wild to
We're
think about.
gone.
Yeah.
They are really the dominant life force on this planet. And they have created not only, as I said, food, but they've created all these incredible medicines, all these plant compounds that the plant may have created for a specific reason, but they have very real and powerful impacts on us. Some cases they can be toxic, yeah, and there are toxic plants, but in many cases they are deeply nutritive, they are healing. And so I fell in love with plants. And here we are 58 years later, and this is the great love affair of my life. And
I love that.
plants have never let me down. I
Mm.
mean, there are times where maybe I can't figure something out. That's me. But the plants, there's a story that my uncle used to tell, and we don't have time for me to tell the story. But in the story, the animals and the insects get really upset with us because we've forgotten our place in the world and we've
Mhm.
forgotten how to show respect to them. And they basically try to wipe us off the face of the earth. And, but everybody gets sick, but not everybody dies. And so the plants go to the green people and ask them if they'll help to wipe us out, basically to just destroy us. And the plant people say, well, we need to think about this. We need to pray about this. This is not a decision to be made lightly. And they take time to pray about it. And they come back and they say that they recognize that the creator that made them created us as well. And that most of what we do is not out of malice, it's out of ignorance. So
Mhm.
they tell us in the story that they decided that if we came to the plants in a sacred way, in a good way, they would give us the cure for every disease that the insect people who brought disease into the world made. And people hear that and they go, oh, that's a nice little myth. That's a nice fable. That's a story. But I would say that it's actually not. It's none of those things. It's history. The plants made a deal with us, a compact, and that compact is still in force today. Think of it as a contract. If we come to them in a good way, in a sacred way, they will give us the cure for every disease that exists. And so one of the stories that you've probably heard me tell, I may have told it on Rosemary's podcast. I may have told it on Rosalie's podcast. I've told it many times, is that the idea that we can learn from plants is not one of these kind of woo-woo, oh yeah, that's nice. It is a very real phenomenon. And so maybe today, some point, we'll talk about a couple of those stories about the plant taught me something that has then been used clinically in practice in many cases for decades, with case history after case history, confirming that these are really very real phenomenon.
Yeah, that's a blessing. Do you ever feel that in a past life, because you said that if you believe in past lives, for people that believe in past lives, that you were making a poultice at the age of like 5 or 6, and then you're 13 and you're realizing, right, that you're stepping into your role as a medicine person. And I'm wondering, like, do you ever feel that this was something that you did in the past life, or because your connection came in so strong at a young age? If you believe in that sort of thing.
There's lots of things I'm ignorant about. Like, so people say to me, what do you think about herbal astrology? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't, I'm uneducated in astrology, so I don't know. I don't assume because I'm ignorant of something that it's not real.
Right.
I don't know about that. I don't know about previous lifetimes. I asked my uncle about that one time. I said, well, what do you think about it? And he says, I don't know. Nobody's ever come back and told us. Now, some people say that's not true, but that was his response. So I don't know. I honestly think, and that may be real. Again, I can't say. But what I can say is I believe, going back to what I was talking about before, I believe almost all children, especially at a very young age, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe, and usually by 7, we're fully into this world. But some people, perhaps myself included, because of all, I mean, I was extremely visually impaired and didn't actually see till I was had my first eye surgery at 18 months. I had surgery at 5 and at 3, and my third surgery at 5. So my perception of the world, I think, is a little bit different. And because of that, and because of my life experiences as a child, I never fully arrived into the dominant culture mindset. So I was always open to other possibilities. So for instance, in my 2-year herb studies program, my program is designed to train clinical herbalists for people who are serious about either being clinicians. A lot of my students are already physicians or nurse practitioners or veterinarians or dentists or acupuncturists, et cetera. Although many of my students are just people who really want to know herbal medicine,
Right.
whether to be a community herbalist or a clinical herbalist. And so in that, there is this idea that if we really want to do something and we really want to do it well, it is imperative to immerse yourself. And so the goal is to really immerse people into the concepts of herbal medicine, to teach people how to think like an herbalist, which is quite different. I mentioned earlier about a lot of people became herbalists because they went to orthodox practitioners, orthodox medicine, and couldn't get positive results. They had nothing to offer. I personally find that a lot of people in our culture, it's an either-or phenomenon. So it's either orthodox medicine or Western medicine or herbal medicine or alternative medicine. And in my opinion, nothing could be further from the truth.
Before we finish today's episode, I want to let you in on one of the most powerful ways to reclaim your health. Not only making medicine with wild herbs, but actually eating wild plants as part of your daily life. Wild plants are some of the most nutrient dense foods on this planet. And when you learn how to identify them, harvest them with gratitude, and bring them into your kitchen, your health will shift. I pinky promise. And this is exactly what I teach inside the Wild Herb Academy membership, where each month you learn medicinal and edible plants that are in season, and you learn how to bring them into your kitchen. If you're ready to reclaim your health, I welcome you into the Wild Herb Academy membership. The doors are open now, my friend. I hope to see you.
So, where orthodox medicine is strong
Mm-hmm.
is where herbal medicine is weak.
Yeah.
If you get bitten by a deer tick and you have a bullseye rash or the other common early symptoms of Lyme disease, stiff neck, crushing fatigue, a headache that will just not go away, what herb's good for that? No herb is known to be good for that. I mean, there's people who claim, but they have no evidence of this. The only thing that we know will cure Lyme disease, early stage, most of the time, 95% of the time, is doxycycline. So go get some doxycycline. On the other hand, where Western medicine is weak is exactly where herbal medicine is strong.
Mm-hmm.
Not either or, it's what's more appropriate in a given situation, in a specific condition, or for a specific person.
Mm-hmm.
Again, for instance, 2 weeks ago, I taught in my 2-year program, we do a class on ADHD. And if you have a family who all they want is their child to take a pill, then Adderall or something of that nature, Ritalin, Adderall, are probably your best bets. They work most of the time. The adverse effects are usually not terrible. And studies have shown ultimately that they are beneficial probably about 70% of the time. On the other hand, if you are willing to make serious lifestyle changes,
Yeah.
change your diet, change lifestyle, take herbs, and the whole family's really got to buy in. Because if you have other kids and they get to eat all this other stuff, it's just not going to work. Then herbs can be incredibly effective. Herbs, supplements, lifestyle changes, dietary changes can be incredibly effective, but it's much more work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is this family willing to do? It also gives you a child who ultimately is going to be so much healthier because you're doing all these other things that also enhance sleep and health and immune competence and all these other things. So again, getting back to my 2-year herb studies program, a lot of schools, they teach it's either all science or it's all tradition, magic, myth. And like, there are two different ways of knowing the world, and they are. But my philosophy has always been, why do I have to choose one or the other?
Mm-hmm.
Both equally useful ways of gaining information. Think of them as two different sets of glasses, two different lenses to look at the world through. And so in my program, we look at science, we look at tradition, whether it is traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda or Unani Tib or the eclectics or the physiomedicalists. That's all great stuff. But we also will talk about things like learning directly from the plants, like
Yeah.
I've been doing all of my life.
That is very powerful. And if you can weave in all the different traditions, some of them are thousands of years old, like Ayurveda, I think that's where the herbal programs can be a lot stronger. Because from my experience starting out studying Western herbalism and now studying more Ayurveda and teaching Ayurveda now because I had to, because I felt like you got to really understand your body before you can heal. And not every herb is going to be good for everybody. And so I think that's where Western herbalism has kind of fallen short, is the energetic part and the constitution of the person. You have 50 years of clinical practice. And I want to talk to you about herbal energetics because that's an important part of your practice. And you say, treat the patient first, right? Like figure out their body and their constitution, which I think is hugely important. Through your practice, though, before we get into that, because you talk about how Western medicine, which I love, it's not either or, we can use both. What condition, like in your clinical practice, have you just been able to treat successfully over and over again with herbs that you would say, like, if someone has these conditions, regardless of their body type, they should turn to herbs?
Recovery from head trauma,
Mhm.
chronic kidney disease, autoimmune diseases, chronic skin conditions, almost any chronic degenerative disease,
Mm.
they work really well. There are, and again, it's important to kind of look at, there are times, so if somebody has severe head trauma,
Mhm.
you want to, Western medicine can save your life. But in the recovery phase, where often I remember I had a patient, this is 35, 40 years ago, and her husband was a good friend of mine, and she'd had bacterial meningitis, and they realized something was very wrong. She was in the hospital, IV antibiotics. They saved her life. Herbs would not have saved her life. Orthodox medicine saved her life. But then when she was discharged, she was by profession a storyteller. And when she was discharged, she had severe cognitive impairment. She couldn't speak clearly.
Mhm.
Her hearing was problematic. Her vision, I mean, even walking was difficult. And they were going to send her to occupational therapy and physical therapy and everything. And they wanted to know, how long is it going to take for her to recover her full mental faculties and abilities? And they told her, well, it's a slow, gradual process. And hopefully within a year, she would be mostly back to normal. And she wasn't happy with that response. And my friend wasn't happy with it. And he calls me up and says, is there anything we can do? And I said, yeah. There are lots of herbs. There are herbs that are known as nootropics or nootropics. They're both correct pronunciations. And these are herbs that are anti-inflammatories. They enhance cerebral circulation, enhancing memory, cognitive function, focus, etc. Many of them are also anxiolytics and antidepressants. And so we put her on a protocol, and in 2 months, she was 90% recovered.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, understand an N of one, meaning a sample size of one. Maybe if we had done nothing in 2 months, she would have been
Right.
fully recovered, except that after that case, and this is really interesting because, and I've had this happen multiple times in my clinical practice, where I treat something and all of a sudden I get a whole bunch of people with the same condition, but
Oh,
not like people who know each other. It's not like one person told another person. This one seems almost cosmic in the sense that all of a sudden I was treating a whole lot of people with head trauma injuries. And I've
mm.
treated a lot of people with head trauma injuries from many different, everything
Mm.
from severe concussions to brain bleeds to bacterial meningitis, a whole range of conditions causing neurological damage. And I'm not going to say, oh, it works every time. It doesn't. Well,
Right.
I would say there's improvement almost every time, although sometimes the improvement is not what I would like to see. But I would say easily 65% to 70% of these people have pretty much full, complete recoveries, and usually in fairly quick amounts of time.
That's amazing. Are you giving them capsules? Are you giving them a tincture? And what
Um,
is the main herb you think, like the chief herb in your blend?
there isn't a chief herb. I could give you a list of several important
Several
herbs.
herbs.
And depending on the herb, the form it's given in. So I use a lot of tinctures, which are alcohol and water extracts of herbs. Occasionally I use capsules and or tablets, although less so. Teas when appropriate. And for me, tea herbs, yes, there are people who will take anything, but that's not the average person. If, as a clinician, your biggest issue is always compliance.
Yeah.
So therefore, don't give somebody something. Somebody always asks my patients, what are your favorite herb flavors and what are your least favorite? Which ones don't you like? And if somebody says, oh, I hate licorice, we're not talking about Twizzlers, black licorice flavor, then don't give them licorice. Don't give them fennel. Don't give them star anise. All the
Right.
are licorice-like flavor because chances are they're not going to take it. So I like to give teas with things that taste good because,
Mhm.
again, compliance is going to be better. And the stuff that's nasty tasting, I'm going to be using mostly is a tincture or sometimes as capsules or tablets. Occasionally, mostly in children, I use glycerates, which are glycerin extracts. a lot of plants don't make good glycerin extracts. If it's water soluble, it'll make a decent glycerin. If it's non-water soluble, it won't make a good glycerin. Chinese herbs, I'll often use what are called extract granules. So Chinese herbs, they basically cook them up, make decoctions, and then freeze dry them basically. And
Yeah,
those can
fast.
be very useful. So there's all different formats as to how we're going to give people herbs to ingest.
Mhm.
But when we talk about nootropic herbs or nootropic herbs, bacopa,
Bacopa, yeah.
gotukola, lion's mane, St. John's wort, white peony, lavender,
Mhm.
lemon balm, rosemary, all of these herbs, push pea, which is an Ayurvedic herb, all of these herbs act as nootropics. Again, they are neuroanti-inflammatories. They enhance cerebral circulation. They are phenomenal. And again, it's not one, it's which ones make sense for this
Mhm.
person. And if you
Yeah.
don't mind, that kind of just would bring me into the idea of energetics, which I believe.
Yeah, definitely. We can
So,
move into herbal energetics for sure. I love that you brought in Bacopa. There's a native one here, Bacopa caroliniana, and it smells absolutely amazing, and I love it. And then, it's in these rare Carolina bays. It's not common. You don't see it a lot. So it's not something that we can get a lot of, but Bacopa monnerii grows around here like almost like a weed if you find it in certain spots, and it grows almost year round. And that thing is like when you eat it raw, it's like whew. And then we also have gotukola here. We have Centella asiatica variety caroliniana right in the yards.
hmm,
And that, I mean, so we're so blessed. And then we have hydrocotyle. So in South Carolina, we have all these very important brain herbs to keep the brain young and healthy and protect it from degenerative diseases. And they're really high in antioxidants. So I'm always like advocating for people just to consume those on the regular, and water, like just taking the green herb, blending it up in water and drinking the juice. And of course, being pitta, herbal energetics, that's what I'm gravitating towards
hmm.
versus dry tea. I like it fresh. I like them fresh. But anyway, I love that you the first one you brought up was Bacopa, because when you were talking about your blend, I was like thinking Bacopa and rosemary. And so I thank you for sharing some of those. And I think probably we should be consuming some of those herbs regularly to keep our brains healthy and young. So some of the more like rosemary. But anyway, so you talk about how you said, well, guess we could start with this. What is plant energetics and why is it important?
Okay. So it seems in the herbal community, people have two different ideas about what they're talking about when they're talking about the term energetics. Energetics, as it comes from TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, or Ayurveda, or Unani Tib, or Campo, or all the other kind of traditional medical systems, what we are talking about is the plant's temperament. And what that means is the plant heating or cooling, drying or moistening, stimulating or calming? Those are the energetics. Other people are talking about more of a sort of a more esoteric concept. And that, I'm not saying that's not real. That's just not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about energetics. They may be talking more about like with the Bach flower remedies, which are kind of a pseudo homeopathic preparation of flowers where they're used for treating emotional imbalances. And that's all good and fine. You started using the Bach flower remedies back in 1975, I think, when you had to get them from the Bach Center in England because no one brought them into the United States. And that's all fine and good. But when we're talking about the energy or energetics of herbs, we're talking about their, again, what is sometimes called the show or the temperament of the herb.
Mhm.
And the beauty of that is it gives you a sense of the direction and the qualities, how that herb's going to affect a specific person. The other side of that is the concept of human energetics. And human energetics or differential diagnosis is what's going on in the person. Do they have a underlying inflammatory pattern, which is heat? Do they have congestion, which or stagnation, which is also often dampness? And so by determining this, you can do something that's, in my opinion, vitally important. So when I'm teaching a group of people, and I'll say to them, how many of you want to be a good herbalist? And everybody raises their hand. And then I'll go, wrong answer. If you're going to be an herbalist, but the reality, I would say this is true about anything you do. If you're going to be a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician, a lawyer, a doctor, whatever it is you're going to be, don't be content to just be good. Do your best to be great. Now,
I love that.
I don't mean you think you're great. That's hubris.
Right.
I mean that you recognize that you only, first off, people, I joke and I don't joke when I tell people, after 58 years, I now feel comfortable calling myself an advanced beginner. Do I know something? Sure I do, but I'm also more than a bit aware that there's more that I don't know than I do know. And that's no matter how smart you are, no matter how long you've been doing something, there is always more that you don't know than you do know. And in fact, I think sometimes the more you know about something, the more cognizant you are of how much you do not know. So the idea is, if you're going to be an herbalist, I want all my students to be great herbalists. So what do I mean by that? I mean that number one, they understand their limitations. Nobody has all the knowledge. So there's nothing wrong in saying, when somebody asks you, saying, I don't know. Or
Right.
maybe this person over here has more experience with this than I do. So be humble. But in addition, it means that you're always striving to be better. You're always striving to learn more. You're always striving to be a better person, a better clinician. And to me, that's really what striving to be great is all about. But in order to do that, in my opinion, beyond certain soft skills, which is actually very difficult to teach, like learning how to actually listen,
Right.
I find in our culture, and this is this is obviously perhaps an exaggeration. It's not a true across the board, but I generally find women in our culture are much better listeners than men. Men want to fix everything right away. But if you're going to be a practitioner, you have to learn to listen. Not listen to the person's story and their journey, but listen to not only the words, but how they're saying the words. Listen to their body language, which is, of course, more seeing. But so those are the soft skills. Learning how to listen, learning how to be patient, learning how to effectively communicate to someone, learning how to get the messages that you're being sent that are not overtly being sent at all.
Right.
I mean, a patient will tell you right off the bat whether they're going to be compliant or not in your first interview. And then if they're not telling you they're not, you have to decide whether you actually even want to work with this person. And if you do, then you have to figure out how to have a conversation where you acknowledge what they're telling you, but at the same time, state clearly what your expectations are for the quote unquote healing relationship. Very frustrating if it's only going one way. If you're making suggestions, and then my uncle used to say, there's two things in the world people want more than anything else. One is to be told what to do, and two is not to do it. So, again, and if you're a clinician, it's extremely frustrating to have people who they're, in a sense, kind of wasting their time and wasting your time, unless, again, you have that understanding. But there are certain skills that can be taught that are really important. And first off is plant energetics. Plant energetics allows you to understand the energy of the herb. Human energetics allows you to understand the energy and the constitution of the person you are dealing with. And when you can put these two together, it allows you to do something that is exceedingly important, in my opinion, in herbal medicine. And that is, you stop treating diseases and you start treating people.
Definitely. I love that.
Hippocrates said, supposedly, more than 2,000 years ago, and the great Jewish physician Moses Maimonides said about 700 years ago, or maybe 800 years ago, it's more important to know the person that has the disease than the disease a person has. And they were both correct. So we could have somebody diagnosed, 5 people all diagnosed with dysthymia, basically depression. But they're not 5 depressions. And one of the reasons, in my opinion, that orthodox medicine actually does not work all that well with depression is when you look at the clinical trials of SSRIs and SNRIs, the primary antidepressant medications, most of them work about 40% of the time, which
Mm,
is better than placebo, which is 33% of the time, but it's only about 7% better. It's not impressive. Some people claim they work up to 60% of the time, but that's not what the studies really say. So if we, though, look at those people and look at the person who is depressed and the underlying pathophysiology, why are they depressed? Is
mhm,
it cardiac induced depression? Is it thyroid induced depression? Is it blood sugar dysregulation induced depression? Is it old age induced depression? Is it life induced depression? I mean,
mm,
these are all different things. And from an herbal perspective, we're going to treat every single one of them differently.
yeah,
And so you're treating the person who is depressed and the kind of depression that they have rather than, okay, everybody gets this.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that allows you to really increase the efficacy of what you do
mhm,
and your ability to make it to help make a difference in people's lives. The third point I would just point out very quickly in this sort of drive to be great that I think is equally important is understanding synergy.
mm,
And synergy is the idea that when you put herbs together intelligently, that 1 + 1 no longer equals 2. 1
mm.
+ 1 can equal 3 or 4 or 5. I know of one study showing that adding herb A to herb B increased bioavailability by 2000%. So 1 + 1 equals
What?
2000.
Dang, that's amazing.
It is. But just throwing a bunch of herbs together doesn't guarantee synergy because there is also
Right.
another phenomenon called anti-synergy or
Mm.
antagonism, where 1 + 1 equals 1, or maybe 1 + 1 equals 0.
So what would you say is an example of that, like from an energetic standpoint?
Okay, so let's take two really common herbs. One being marshmallow,
Mhm,
and the other one being something like, let's say, oak bark. Oak bark is full of tannins. Marshmallow is full of mucopolysaccharides, what are now called GAGs, glycoaminoglycans. And these are wonderful substances, but in the presence of tannins, which are really strong in oak bark and bayberry and wild geranium, and there's many herbs that matter, rubia, all these herbs have a lot of tannins. If you mix them together in the same formula, whether it's a tea or a tincture, the tannins bind with the polysaccharides, creating what I like to call a mucosoidal phlegm ball. And it's just this thing that's sitting in the middle of your tincture and expands. So if you don't leave enough head space in your tincture bottle, it'll actually explode the bottle.
wow.
And you can try shaking it as much as you want. It will not go back into solution. You've just ruined your medicine. And you may as well compost it because it's no longer has any activity at all. So that's an example of
Great example.
antagonism, and it's a really good, clear example. The good
Yeah.
news is it's relatively there's not that many of those, but
Mhm,
there are some, but there are more examples of where you add herb A and herb B and you just get no synergy at all.
mm,
They don't hurt each other, but they don't increase the activity. And I teach a whole class on synergy, and it's really fascinating. And the easiest way to figure out synergy is simply looking at these traditional systems of medicine, which for hundreds or thousands of years have been using these herbs. And over that time, clinicians realized, wow, when I use this herb with this herb, my results are better. So I'll give you an example. We're talking about depression. So St. John's wort, you'll often hear St. John's wort, oh, it's the depression herb. First
mhm,
off, St. John's wort is not the depression herb. And I would also point out that black cohosh is not the menopause herb, and saw palmetto is not the prostate herb. The problem with each of those statements is they are wrong, wrong, and wrong.
mhm,
Does it mean that St. John's wort has no benefit for depression? No, it does. And saw palmetto and black cohosh all have some benefit, but the reality is they're rather underwhelming in their activity when used in that rather allopathic way. Anytime you hear these little sound bites of information, probably not accurate. So what you want to do is you want to look at these things and figure out where do they work? So St. John's wort, if we're talking about something like seasonal affective disorder, St. John's wort's not very good for seasonal affective disorder. There is a second herb, lemon balm, which is a very common herb, easy to grow, makes delicious tea, which also by itself has some benefit for seasonal affective disorder, but is not great. But the two herbs together, oh my goodness, the effect is exponentially greater than either herb by itself. Now, that's not a traditional herb combination. That's one I just stumbled on. If you're in practice long enough, you're going to come across some of these combinations where adding one herb to another, you just see much, much better results.
It's like the energy. You know the energy of those two herbs and they'll mesh.
Well, in this case, it wasn't so much that I actually knew the energy of the herbs and I knew that they would mesh. I mean, there was nothing keeping them from working together. That one was more sheer luck in just thinking they are both herbs. St. John's wort certainly has some nootropic effects. It does have some antidepressant activity, but of the more than 14 types of depression, it only works really well for about 3. So it's certainly not the quote unquote depression herb. And lemon balm's lovely. It just so happens that that combination works better. And I would say a lot of the times, not to kind of sit there and claim credit where credit is not due, a lot of these herbal combinations that I've come across in my practice were kind of, I mean, they weren't entirely luck. I knew that both herbs made sense together, but the fact that they would actually display overt synergy was more of a and one of those aha moments is like, wow, look at that. I can't entirely take credit for that. But that's happened over and over and over again. And in Chinese medicine, this is incredibly well developed. And these herb pairs are called duiyao. And duiyao means two herbs, herb pairs. Every Chinese formula is based on these duiyao. And so they're building blocks, and you'll have formulas where they'll take 3 herb pairs and put them together and to create a formula. And so you have synergy upon synergy in some cases. And so you get a much greater effect that some of the parts is much greater than any of the individual constituents.
Yes. I love that. And well, what would you say? Because I feel like for this generation that just graduated high school, going into college, they had to go through COVID, and a lot of our youth are being isolated and they're on screens, and we're seeing a rise in depression. And this group of kids that aren't getting enough sun, that are isolated, they're not moving their bodies enough. Like, what would be the herb for that one? For one that's more like probably heart and warmth. I feel like thinking about herbal, like I was just reflecting on this with depression with this group, it feels cold. Like they need more sun, they need more love, they need more warmth. So I don't know how if you have an herb.
I wouldn't say a herb because it still goes down to the individual
Right.
person.
Right.
Everybody is different. But what I would say, and I think you are very astute in your sort of description there, I think that some people have coined it nature deficit disorder. I think we have a younger generation that feels very isolated, that feels very detached from things. Many of them they're growing up in a time where they're thinking about why bother falling in love? Why bother having a family? Because the world that we're living in is so messed up and so problematic. And you look at all the issues of social injustice and poverty and war and climate change, and the list just goes on and on and on. And I think it is, to some degree, for many people, I think it is human nature to just look at that and just kind of throw your hands up and shake your head and just go, it's hopeless. Why bother? On the other hand, that's not true for everybody. Some people look at that and go, how can I make this better? And if you give up, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if everybody gives up, then it doesn't get better.
Right.
And I mean, I grew up in a very different time. I'm old. And I grew up in a really different time. Some people romanticize the time I grew up in. It was not all wonderful. We used to have nuclear bomb drills in school, where we'd go under our desks and tuck our head between our knees and kiss your ass goodbye, because if they dropped a nuclear bomb, being under your desk wasn't going to help. And it had its own level of stressors and things
Yeah.
like that. So I think as clinicians, as friends, as family members, as
Mhm.
partners to others, I think it is important that number one, that we try to find things that nourish us and strengthen us. I'm not just talking about herbs, I'm talking about in life.
Mhm.
Find things that you enjoy doing. And just certainly, not everybody's a plant person, not everybody's an outdoor person, but studies have shown as little as 20 minutes twice a week in nature. It can be in your garden, it can be in a park, it could be in the woods, doing Japanese forest bathing, whatever it is, as little as 20 minutes twice a week. That's not very much. Besides the fact that if you're out walking, it's beneficial and you're breathing, hopefully, cleaner air, makes you much more resistant to both depression and anxiety. And it's not just our younger generation. I had never really lived through a pandemic before. I mean, we had SARS and obviously the HIV/AIDS epidemic, but a true pandemic, which was a contagious airborne virus like that, the last really big one was the 1917, 1918 flu epidemic, which they estimate killed 50 million people worldwide. Well, that's well before my time. I'm old, but I'm not that old. And so I found it incredibly anxiety producing. Anxiety has never been like my go-to feeling, but I found it created an incredible level of anxiety. And coming out of that, and so our younger folks, many of them, they had to go on online learning, which
Yeah.
not the worst thing in the world, but when you're young and socialization is so important to there were people who graduated high school and had to do their graduation online and everything. So I think all of that is real. And I think that we need to support and
Mhm.
help younger people. And one of the things that I think is really important is I think that in our culture, and this is totally nothing to do with herbs, so apologize if I'm kind of going off on a tangent too much, but we are living in a culture where everybody is more than happy to silo themselves and isolate themselves and only hang out with people who look like them, who think like them. And I think that is just a huge mistake. I
Mhm.
think the more that we can spend time with people of different ages, I love spending time with, well, first of all, my grandkids, but younger people, they are so vital and alive. And sometimes when I'm sitting there going, oh God, I'm tired. It's a good, infectious, all that energy and that vitality. It's a wonderful thing. It used to be in many cultures that the grandparents did most of the child rearing because they were older and not as active and not able to go out and farm.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have lost a lot of that. Find
Yeah.
ways to connect to people who are different than you, who look different than you, who have different life experiences, who have different values, different beliefs, because what I think ultimately what we find is at the core is we have more in common than separates us.
Mhm.
And if we can find that commonality of humanity, that commonality of care and love, I suspect almost everybody loves their children, most love their children, love their grandchildren, want to see a better life for the grandchildren. And then we can find ways to work together. And this honestly is very much the way I see herbal medicine. It's not about either this, either
Right.
that. It's not about extremes. It's about helping the body, coaxing the body, helping to heal the body and gently lift the body toward being well.
Yeah.
Not a lot of sledgehammers here.
Mm.
A lot more of a more gentle, gradual approach to regaining or maintaining health rather than this whole idea that we're going to kill something and sometimes that's necessary. Don't get me wrong. But I just think that that whole philosophy that I'm just kind of mentioning and talking about I think is foundational because what a lot of people have this idea that herbs can cure everything. They can't.
Yeah. Or they could take a pill and then they have a terrible diet and they're not going outside. It's like, so
Herbs are not foundational.
yeah.
Unless with your diet, that would be foundational. Herbs are not foundational. The foundations of health are a good diet,
Mhm.
adequate, good quality sleep, not just the number of hours, but when you wake up in the morning, do you feel refreshed? If somebody
Mhm.
says no, there's something going on there. It could be
Yeah.
but a lot of times, maybe they have sleep apnea, sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, periodic limb movement disorder. Something's going on there that needs to be addressed. Exercise, healthy lifestyle choices,
Mhm.
laughter and love,
Yeah.
relationships. And it could be with people, it could be companion animals, it could be with nature. But all of those things, in my opinion, those are the foundations of health.
They
And then
are.
herbs are my favorite therapeutic tool.
They really are. And a lot of people, a lot of the youth aren't, and that was really well said. A lot of the youth aren't getting any of those that you just mentioned. The diet's off, the sleep is off, the movement is off, the community is off. In my lifetime, I'm hoping to help with intentional communities because I really think now the cost of living is way too high and the kids can't afford. Like where I live on James Island, like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house is like 3,500 a month. No one can afford that. And I'm thinking like, okay, if I can ever help start an intentional community through maybe a nonprofit, then this house, it's got 3 bedrooms. Everyone else should be living in this house. Like it shouldn't be one family. It should be multiple families, multiple generations. And I think this is the way we have to go back to living. Because one, we probably eat healthier because we're all sharing food. We'll probably move more because we'll be with each other. We'll have each other. We'll have that warmth, that heart. So I'm hoping that this generation, like my daughter, her children, it will just happen because it's like actually economics is forcing us for this to happen because people can't afford to live in their own little isolated homes. Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to say, like, one of the things I wanted to ask you, and then I want to move to your school. There's a lot more things, but I think I'll just maybe have to have you back on. I would love to have you back on. As an herbalist, I feel like we learn so much through our body, right? Because we can experience it firsthand. So what has been the herbs that help you stay in harmony? What are your go-to?
Well,
You
number one, it changes, meaning
changes.
change. So the herbs change. So
Mhm.
it's not like I necessarily take the same thing every day. I will say, like, for instance, we were just talking about COVID. During COVID, I took a lot of andrographis. Andrographis is a herb used in both Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. It is really bitter. It's also known as, in Sanskrit, it's called Kalmeg, king of the bitters. It's bitter. And it is also profoundly antiviral. And so I feel it helped protect me at that time. Being older, that's certainly a risk factor for something like COVID. On a daily basis, well, let me think about this. One of the joys of getting older, they have all these sayings, getting old is not for sissies. Well, there's definitely some truth there. Even if you are in amazingly good health, getting older has its share of trial and tribulations. It also has some positive aspects as well. But inflammation, there's a whole term they've coined. It's called inflammaging. And it's the
Oh.
chronic low-grade inflammation associated with aging is called inflammaging.
Mhm.
So anti-inflammatories are really useful. Now, where does that start? Does it start with herbs? Well, not exactly. It starts with diet.
Yeah.
You hear people talking about eat the rainbow, and they're not talking about Skittles. You-
Yeah.
We're talking about all those wonderful, brightly vibrant colored fruits and vegetables, which are full of these flavonoid compounds. We were talking before about the nootropic herbs. A great nootropic is blueberries.
Yeah.
Incredible effect.
Very much so. Yeah.
Blueberries every single day. And then I'll throw in strawberries or blackberries. Some summers I'll teach a friend of mine, Chanchel Cabrera, who's a phenomenal herbalist. She's up in British Columbia. I'll be actually teaching at her place next month, Canadian Herb Conference.
Nice.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if it's sold out yet, but if it's not and you're up in that part of the world, the keynote speakers are myself, Rosemary Gladstar, and Nancy Turner, who's probably the world's foremost ethnobotanist. And
Wow.
it's going to be recorded as well. It should be
Nice.
anyway. When I'm up at Chancel's, usually it's just something called Herb Camp in the summer. And he said it's in August, and her farm is planted with berries. And like every morning for breakfast, I just go out and graze on the blueberries and the boysenberries and the thimbleberries and the raspberries, and it's just like it's endless. It's like I'm a bear. Just
I love that. Yeah.
But then other things, whether it is winter squashes or your butternut squashes, or whether it's things like red or purple or orange peppers, or just all of these things in our diet. And then using herbs, we talked about this before, whether it's using rosemary in your cooking or basil or garlic or ginger or cinnamon or oregano or thyme or summer savory or fennel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one, they're all profoundly anti-inflammatory. So number one, it starts with diet and then avoiding things that are pro-inflammatory. Sugars, refined carbohydrates, most of your sort of artificial colors, preservatives, things of that nature, excessive sodium, which is
Yeah, that's huge.
sorry. A little to throw in, any of our listeners who have autoimmune diseases, this is something you're probably never going to hear. One of the things that contributes to autoimmune disease is excess sodium intake. Excess sodium stimulates STAT3 production. STAT3 production stimulates Th17T lymphocyte production. And without that increased level of Th17T lymphocytes, there is no autoimmune disease. So you might want to consider reducing your sodium intake if you have an autoimmune disease. I'm not saying it's the answer to your autoimmune disease, but it may help to slow the progression. Anyway, so an anti-inflammatory diet, obviously trying to breathe clean air if that's an option for you. And then herbally, we have, of course, everything I just mentioned as a spice are all medicinal herbs as well. Some incredible medicinal herbs that are profoundly anti-inflammatory. And of course, the herb of the moment, the last 8 years, is turmeric. Turmeric is phenomenal, but be aware that much of what is being sold is not turmeric, it's curcumin. And probably heard that curcumin is the active ingredient in turmeric. All right, so first off, there are 3 curcuminoids that make up curcumin. And curcumin really comes from basically the idea that turmeric has a set of active ingredients. Since they identified the curcuminoids as the active constituents in turmeric, an additional 15 to 20 active ingredients have been discovered that aren't in curcumin.
Yeah.
About 10 years ago, showing a curcumin-free product had just as much anti-inflammatory and anti-tumor activity as did curcumin.
I believe it.
Also poorly absorbed and quickly excreted. So then you have to add in bioperin, which is a black pepper extract, or phosphatidylcholine, or micelles or nanoparticles to get it in your body and to keep it in your body for longer. In naturally occurring turmeric, there are chemicals in there that enhance absorption of turmeric without adding anything, of the curcuminoids without adding anything. And by the way, the traditional combination for using turmeric is not turmeric and black pepper, it's turmeric and ginger.
Turmeric and ginger. And also, too, I heard like if you do it in fat, like ghee, or you're cooking with it. But yeah, I think staying away from doing one anti-inflammatory herb, taking that every day, is not really good for the body. And also, like you said, isolated, because then the liver metabolizes it. It sees it as that foreign. So it needs to come in with, like you're saying, other phytochemicals, which are probably hundreds. So yeah, so that is great advice. And I love that you're taking care of your whole body, mind, body, and spirit. So before we end, because I know we have to go and I want to talk about the herbal studies, but I have to just kind of do a little shout out for Albizia. And I know that you have this long history. Most herbalists love Albizia. And I'm just assuming that you have this relationship with mimosa Albizia. So can you talk briefly about the herbal energetics, how you see and Albizia julebressen, which is mimosa, which is flowering right now and will be flowering when this podcast is released?
So in Chinese medicine, the bark is called hehuanpi, collective happiness peel, and the flowers are called hehuanhua, or collective happiness flowers. It is a plant native to China, and it has been used in Chinese medicine. I've been using mimosa bark for 40 years clinically, and of course, I learned it from its traditional Chinese uses. And The flowers are nice, but they're very mild. I mostly use the flowers for children who are depressed, like with mimosa flower and lemon balm is a nice starting point for maybe a child who's just kind of moody and it's not like adult depression. They're just kind of bummed out and everything. It can be a nice little combination. And other things can be added, linden flower and lemon verbena, whatever. The bark is what I primarily used, and the mimosa bark is the single best mood elevator that I am aware of that's legal.
Mm.
You give it to people and they start walking around like this with this big smile on their face. And you go, "Hey, wow, you look so happy. Why are you so happy?" They go, "I have no idea. My face is smiling." It is a mood elevator. I wouldn't even call it an antidepressant. I call it a mood elevator. Now, be aware, do not give it to people who have bipolar disorder. It can push people into manic episodes. I've seen it happen. So that you do not want to do. Studies have shown that mimosa helps prevent reinstatement of fear memories, among other things. So I use mimosa. I use a combination, which, by the way, I learned this from the plants, not, I didn't figure this out. It's mimosa bark, organic fragrant rose petals, and hawthorn berries and flowers. And I use that for treating chronic grief, what I call stagnant depression, which is situational depression that becomes chronic. I use it for PTSD.
Wow.
So will not give it to somebody with PTSD unless they are in therapy with a therapist they trust, because it's going to, all of a sudden stuff's going to start coming up. And if they have somebody to help work through it, it'll be great. If they don't, it may not be so great.
Right.
Use it for treating broken hearts. And a lot of people think when they hear broken hearts, they think it's a literary sort of allegory. No, there's even something called broken heart syndrome. You have a couple who've been married, happily married, and I know that in itself is somewhat of a rarity, but it's something to aspire to. You have a couple who's been married for 40 or 50 years, and one partner dies, and the other, more often than not, it's the man that dies. Women tend to live longer than men, but not always. And the other partner, for their age, is actually in pretty good health. And within a year, they're dead. They died of a broken heart. That's treatable.
Yeah.
So that combination I use for a whole range of really chronic, again, types of depression and other associated conditions. And it's incredible. I would say in Chinese medicine, mimosa is also used for blood stagnation with pain. So it's used for a lot of arthralgias and things like that. I don't use it. I mean, I've used it for that, but it's like its effect on elevating mood is so profound that tends to be much more frequently where I am using it. So I just love it. And in the Southeast, it's become a weed.
I know.
It was brought in as an ornamental, but it grows very nicely all by itself. And so the nice thing is, if you have an area where it's become sort of invasive, you just take some of them out and you bark, and you've got really clean, fresh medicine.
We're really blessed to have that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That was really valuable. And for you listening, I feel that it's a very gentle medicine too. So even if you're not depressed, like I love working with the flowers, and you can work with the bark and just see how it makes you feel. I feel like it's a very safe medicine for most people. All right, before we wrap up, I would love for you to tell the listeners about your amazing 2-year program, because right now we're talking in May, but it'll be June before we know it. And your program, you're interviewing students right now, and your program starts in September. And you told me before we got started that you're likely going to wrap up. You're going to step away as a teacher. I know you'll still be the dean of the school, but maybe you're not teaching in 4 years. So when the school, after you've been teaching for 50 years, maybe you're going to pass the torch to another teacher. But anyhow, so if you want to study with David, which I highly recommend, definitely check out the link at the end of the show notes for the school. But I would love to hear from you if you want to share with students and the community and the listeners about your program.
So it's the David Winston Center for Herbal Studies, and we're currently in our 45th and 46th year. And the next program will be the 47th and 48th year. That starts in September. And April's correct that The plan is, God willing, I plan to do one more program after that, which will be the 49th and 50th year. That 50 just seems like a natural point. And then I'm stepping down, not just as the primary teacher, but I won't be the dean anymore either. I am hoping to pass the school on to some of my other instructors, and then come in and do an occasional guest lecture kind of thing. But at this point, I am still the primary teacher and will be for the next program and hopefully the one following that. And the program is a 2-year program, which is designed to train people to be clinical herbalists. About half of my students are medical professionals. They're already medical doctors, naturopathic physicians, veterinarians, acupuncturists, et cetera, nurse practitioners, nurses. And the other half are people who've been self-studying herbs, sometimes for a couple of years, sometimes for decades. A lot of really well-known herbalists have taken the program. Thousands of students have over the 46 years that we've been doing this. And obviously, I am not objective when it comes to this, but I think it's a really remarkable program because the idea is it's really to help people to understand and think like an herbalist and
Yeah.
how to treat people, not diseases. After the 2 years, you will have this incredible deep knowledge of over 300 plants and
Mm.
therapeutics and how to apply them in different and energetics and differential diagnosis. And one of the things that I really am thrilled about is that one of my early teachers was a literal genius named William Sassier, one of the great herbalists, American herbalists of the 20th century. And William created something he called the triune or triangle system. And it's a way of creating formulas that for a person that are like a tailored suit of clothing to fit that person. And not only do I teach his triune system, but when he taught it to me back in 1976, it was not fully developed. And he never really, as far as I know, fully developed it. But before he passed away, I think in 2005, I actually showed him what I had done with it and basically taken the sheets that go with it so you can then figure out how to use the system, and had it gone from being like 12 pages of handwritten notes, sometimes with 12 herbs on a page, to 80 or 90 page typewritten pages, every system, every TCM system, so that you
Wow.
use this very well. And so the vast majority of my students are unfamiliar with this system when they start. And in the second half of the second year, when we start learning this, in the beginning, it's a little challenging. Some students have called it herbal Sudoku. Other people have called it herbal 3D chess, because you're thinking about the whole person. You're not
Yeah.
about this disease. You're thinking about this whole person, and you're thinking about the person's energetics, and you're thinking about the underlying issues, but not just one underlying, all of the underlying issues. And you're thinking about the energetics, and you're thinking about potential herb-drug interactions. You're thinking about this whole person. It gives you a template to do this. And then you are coming out. So when they first start doing it, maybe they're pulling their hair out. That's what happened to me. No, I'm just kidding. And within 3 months, 90% of them are doing excellent work every week. And by 5 months, when the class ends, it is like 99% of them are doing excellent work.
Mhm.
I still grade every single one.
Wow, that is amazing to even have you grade papers and to have that interaction, I think is a real gift. So if you want to be a clinical herbalist or even just a better herbalist, you don't have to just want to be a clinical herbalist. I mean, even if you're a teacher, like I would love to take your program. I think we can all benefit from taking your program. And I love how you said become a great herbalist because I think that is important. We need more clinical herbalists really bad, and especially really well-trained ones. And it's a lifetime of work. Yeah, you'll still be learning. We'll still always be learning, but it would be wonderful to have more clinical herbalists and to have it more mainstream and to see people that were great herbalists and not just, like you said, sound biting, because I think we do in our culture because of Instagram and social media. A lot of herbalists will get stuck using the same herbs that every herbalist has been using for 20, 40, 50 years. But I think it's important to step beyond that and to learn really the energies of the plants on your own and the energy of the person and to help heal. And so to get a good foundation from David Winston's school would be huge. So I'll put a link to that. Maybe you'll be one of the students he interviews. Thank you so much, David, for your time and your energy. It was so wonderful to talk with you. I hope to meet you in person one day. And I know you're going to have a wonderful group of students this time around.
Well, thank you, April. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to us sometimes meeting in the same place so we can sit down and have a wonderful conversation.
Yes. Let me know if you ever want to come to Charleston.
From Charleston.
Yeah, if you ever want to come to Charleston, we have a place for you. You can stay right beside the apothecary. So this is the apothecary, but there's a beautiful Airbnb attached to it. And you could offer a workshop or anything you want. Maybe when you step away, you can travel more. And if you ever want to come to Charleston.
I travel a heck of a lot now.
Nice. Yeah.
All over the world.
Yay. Well, if you ever come to the Southeast, let me know because I would love to host you here.
Wonderful. Thank you. I look forward to
You're
it.
welcome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Many blessings to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Make sure you follow the Wild Herb Podcast so you can continually deepen your connection with wild plants and nature, the nature within and without. Stay wild and stay human.